Hey everyone, in today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast, I've got Umut back on the show, and we're going to be talking about kind of the antithesis of what the cybersecurity news cycle has been focusing on. Now, they've been talking so much about how threat actors can utilize generative AI for malicious purposes, but we're going to focus on how defensive tool sets and security vendors are utilizing AI inside of their own product sets. So all that and more coming up on today's episode of the Security Swarm podcast. Well, everyone, welcome back for another episode of the Security Swarm podcast, the podcast that brings you the knowledge and insights straight from the security lab here at Hornetsecurity. As always, I'm your host, Andy Serwich, and I've got another regular co-host on the line today. I got Umut. How's it going, Umut?
I'm fine. Thanks for having me, Andy.
Yeah, it's always great having you on the show. I know you're a busy guy, so I think we're going to dive right in. But before we do so, can you give us just a quick introduction to yourself in the off chance that our viewers, listeners, haven't seen or heard an episode with you in it yet?
For sure. I'm Umut. I'm the head of security lab here at Hornetsecurity. I've been with the company for 10 years already, so I accompanied the company through many journeys. My team is responsible for the security stack here at Hornetsecurity, meaning that we analyze a lot of malware, but we also develop tools and services, products to detect phishing emails, fraud emails, and we also make use of AI, the highlight of today's episode.
Exactly. And I guess that's one of my kind of a sidebar here, but that's one of my favorite things about being on the security lab team here at Hornetsecurity is because you get to see like weird things, weird threats come through the department, right? And again, how we're using technologies like AI to kind of solve some of these issues, right? So, and I guess we've kind of given away the topic of today's episode a little bit. And what we're going to focus on today is we're not going to focus specifically on ChatGPT because, you know, I'm sure everybody has heard enough of ChatGPT for the time being, but AI is still a hot topic. And what I wanted to do today in this episode is focus on the use of AI in defensive security tools. And I think this is an important topic because when you look at the cybersecurity news cycle, you would think it's all fire and brimstone when you talk about AI through the lens of security, right? And don't get me wrong. Yeah, I'm sure there's some people yelling at me in their cars while they're listening right now. There is genuine cause for concern. But I want to point out the fact here that Blue Team can use AI as well. And we're going to get into that a little bit later in this episode. But before we get there, let's kind of set a baseline and just talk really quick, you know, for a couple minutes about how AI is changing the threat landscape. And I think, Umut, where I want to start is AI is really enabling those lesser skilled threat actors to launch attacks that they would otherwise be unable to launch, either because they lack the knowledge or the resources, right? What do you think?
Absolutely. So, but we have to more or less apply this rule also to the defender side of things, right? So,
Yep.
we also have lesser skilled people in defending teams, and AI provides them a nice way to get into defensive tactics by learning a lot of content around how to set up these defense mechanisms, how to set up firewalls, how to set up a SIEM system, for example. What are the actual best practices?
Right.
And we have seen in the past how many other different services have used ChatGPT to learn new languages, and the same approach can be used to learn about software stacks, to learn about defensive measures too.
Yep, that makes sense. So I love that we can keep bringing it back to Blue Team because it almost annoys me sometimes when I'm reading through security articles and they focus almost exclusively on the bad stuff, which, I mean, that's the news, right? That's typically how you're going to get clicks. I get it, but I like being able to apply this to Blue Team as well. And I think just more generally, because we've got more threat actors that are going to be launching attacks, we're going to see the amount of attacks increase. So when I look at AI in general, generative AI, not just strictly through a security lens, but just in general in society, we're already seeing an influx of, I guess, what I would call garbage content out on the net. People are using it to, write books and blog posts. I mean, it's amazing actually if you do a search for, I forget exactly the verbiage that ChatGPT uses, but something along the lines of, well, being as I'm a generative AI model, my responses are limited to, and it, right? If you do a search for that in Google, you pull up all kinds of entries where people have just blindly cut and pasted the response into a blog post somewhere. So I guess my point is that we've got an influx of garbage content out on the web just in general, but that's going to apply to security as well. So now we've got a whole new generation of threat actors launching a number of attacks that we haven't seen before. So we're likely to see an increase in threats. And I think that kind of brings me to the key thing that we're talking about today is like, okay, more threats, more capabilities. What's Blue Team going to do about this? And really, I mean, like we said already, Blue Team can use AI as well too. And when I think about the types of things that AI could potentially be used for Blue Team, there's a couple of things that come to mind. And I guess we'll kind of step through each one of these and kind of talk about each one. The first one that I've got on my list is training purposes. And that one is kind of like a bit of a unique, I think that one surprises people when I mention it. And the reason I put this on the list is because all the way back in January, February-ish, when we were doing our early research on the security implications of ChatGPT, that was around the time that Yvonne, our friend Yvonne Bernard, and I did an episode on how we use ChatGPT to generate ransomware. During that same testing, we also determined that it could be used for by threat actors to teach them how to launch attacks. Well, conversely, it can teach Blue Team how to guard against attacks and utilize those same tools, right? So, for example, I asked ChatGPT in some of my early testing, like, hey, what are the top 10 penetration testing utilities, on the market today? And, it's like, okay, Burp Suite, I listed a whole bunch of them, right? Burp Suite's the one that was on the top of the list. I forget the exact order, but I'm like, okay, that's a great example. Okay, tell me more about Burp Suite, ChatGPT. It's like, okay, this is what Burp Suite does. I'm like, okay, how do I use Burp Suite? And in just a very tutorial-ish type manner, kind of, if I was a novice security penetration tester, like I could use it for that. What do you think? What's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So this is actually a quite neat use case for this. Besides that, AI also helps, for example, to simulate real-time attacks, right? So
right.
From a Blue Team perspective, you can actually simulate attacks against the network, and AI can take over the role of the attacker and also react on how the defenders would react by closing open ports, for example, and then adapt to that, search new attack methods against the network and so on. So basically, you could more or less automate the red team using AI to achieve this. So it's really neat to have this use case with AI.
And that is a really good idea, right? So I mean, it's almost like you're doing like a war room simulation, right? Mm-hmm. And this is just conjecture on my part. This is just a theory, but I would have to imagine that, and we've seen this with AI with some other things, sometimes AI reacts in a way that we don't expect it to. And that's kind of what you want in a wargaming simulation with red team versus blue team, right? So it's, it's an interesting use case. I'm kind of interested to see where it goes in the industry from that perspective. The next thing on my list that I wanted to talk about and where AI can really help is log analysis. Now, I don't know about you, Umut, but I do not like log analysis. I've never met an IT pro or security person that enjoys log analysis. Maybe some people are just wired for it. I'm not. But if I could utilize AI to like, hey, look through this 12,000 line log file and look for anything odd, right? That would be really cool. What do you think? Would you find that useful?
Absolutely, and not only for log analysis, but also for metrics, right? So
Right?
one could implement AI to detect anomalies within metrics, to detect service outages on time. Maybe there's a DOS attack that's ongoing against a specific API, for example, or maybe an API has a bug or something like that. You could use
Right?
AI to simply highlight that quite easily. I've seen even use cases that use AI to detect seasonal anomalies. So each Christmas
Interesting.
an anomaly comes up and so on, and the anomaly is more or less capable of doing a forecast so that the engineering team is capable to scale up the systems, for example, or this can also be used to defense specific systems during the holiday season.
And that makes all kinds of sense too, because I always think about our our how we have our monthly metrics on the email security side, and we were actually talked about this in the last episode that you were on for, where we did our August monthly threat review episode,
Mm.
where there's an ebb and flow to threats, email threats throughout the years, right?
Yeah,
And I gotta sneeze. Excuse me. Sorry, everyone. But
bless you.
I appreciate that. But the that ebb and flow, right? And so it applies to like those holidays and those seasonal changes. And you mentioned Christmas. There's more shipping activity happening during Christmas. So if I'm a threat actor, launching phishing attacks, like I'm gonna step up my UPS, FedEx, DHL, Amazon brand impersonation starting right about middle of November. So yeah, I could definitely see it being used for all that type of stuff. Definitely.
Mhm.
And I think the other thing about log analysis, and maybe this is me being kind of a 21-ish year IT pro now. For me, part of it is trust too. Like I think I would have to do my own log analysis and run the AI tool side by side for the first couple of times just to
Mm.
make sure that like I agreed with its findings and it didn't miss anything that I would have considered to be malicious or strange looking. I think there would have to be a trust factor for me there, but I think those concerns are going to be short lived, at least in my opinion. What are your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
I believe that one should do that at any time through any response generated through these
Yeah.
generative AI. So even with the blog articles that you mentioned earlier, right? So if people actually
Right.
looked at the content, they wouldn't have missed the error message that ChatGPT returned.
Yep.
But yeah, at some point AI will be so advanced that it is no longer necessary to really do quality assurance. But I believe it will be in the hands of the engineers at that time to do their quality assurance and make sure that AI also always returns ethical responses. So it's a
Right.
huge challenge that's ongoing at this moment. But I believe until we reach that level, it's always beneficial to check um, what the generative AIs return.
Yep. That makes sense. Okay. The other thing I want to touch on in this area, again, how Blue Team can use AI as well too, is that we kind of mentioned two pretty solid examples, but we have seen some indications in the industry where AI features are already being integrated by security vendors, ourselves included. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. We have some really cool ways that we're using AI in our own stack. But the one thing I wanted to bring up is OpenAI has an initiative, new-ish initiative. It's probably a month or two old now. I'll be sure to link it in the show notes. But basically, it's a grant program to where they will actually assist security vendors in integrating generative AI inside of their security stacks. And I think this is I think it's quite responsible of them, to be honest. I mean, yeah, I suppose there's an air of selfishness on their part because the more security organization, well, just the more organizations that are using their product to begin with means more revenue for them, right? But I think if I'm OpenAI and I'm seeing threat actors using it for nefarious purposes, I'm probably going to try and incentivize blue teams to use it too. I think it's a good move for the industry myself. How about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So this grant came up at the beginning of June, I believe, and
Yep.
my expectation is that we are going to see a few startups using of the cyber grant program going forward. And I also hope that we will get to see some innovative services around cybersecurity using this. Actually, I believe that we collaborate with some unis also, and the feedback that I got from students, we also have some students working at our company, is that they actually looked into this too and already thought about which kind of solutions they could develop. So, in my
Nice.
opinion, this will drive innovations going forward, and we could probably see the first sides of that in the coming months.
It'd be really interesting to see what comes of that, and I think it's a good overall move by the by OpenAI and the industry in general. So, okay, well, we've talked about some example use cases. We mentioned how there are security vendors already utilizing AI instead of their own stack. So, I want to spend some time talking about how we utilize AI in our stack because viewers of the show know that I love to use our software stack as an example. Because I don't know if you learn like I do, an example is worth 1,000 words, right? So, Yumu, I figured this would be a good spot for you to just kind of talk about a couple of things, right? Maybe we start with our ATP stack. I think we've got some AI involved in how we do email clustering, natural language processing, that type of stuff. Can you kind of touch on that for us?
Sure. So we use AI across several products. You mentioned ATP already. ATP stands for Advanced Threat Protection. It's more or less an add-on to our email security product. And what we do here is AI-driven email clustering. So we basically group similar emails together. And this makes threat detection really efficient. To give you an example, some months ago, we had these Emotet malware campaigns, right? So they were
Right.
really hard to detect because they used a technique called conversation hijacking. So the threat actor group behind Emotet more or less exfiltrated thousands of emails from different user inboxes, and each email looked different. Nonetheless, they all contained attachments or links that pointed to files with similar characteristics. And email clustering allowed us to detect these similarities between the emails, although they look completely different.
Right.
And this helped us protect our user base. And as you mentioned, natural language processing is also a big part of our threat detection stack. So natural language processing, in short, is NLP, and that's basically teaching machines how to understand and also respond to human language. So that's it basically. And what we use NLP for is for detecting fraudulent emails. So phishers always make use of the same psychological tricks. They come up with a sense of urgency in emails. Someone really needs to pay this bill now, otherwise we need to
Right.
pay hefty fees and so on. Or they induce fear. So the victim should do something now and so on. And through NLP, through understanding what's written in the text, the machine is actually capable of flagging it as suspicious, especially when the email comes in at a time that the user doesn't expect, or from a sender that the user never had contact to. So this helps us quite a lot to detect fraud emails, CEO fraud emails, BEC emails, phishing emails in general.
And I think that's the key for me there is, the BEC, the business email compromise stuff, because traditionally those style of attacks have been really difficult to stop, right? Because historically we didn't have the natural language processing in the industry, right? So I go back to a previous job, and I think I've told the story on the show before. If you've heard this before, folks, apologies. But the company I was with at the time, the CFO got an email seemingly from the CEO that says, "Oh, hey, we've got this urgent invoice that needs to be taken care of. Please wire $72,000 to this bank account." Right. And again, this was before the days of natural language processing. Heck, this was even before the days of like any email security solution that was really what I would consider to be advanced. I mean, this is like, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, right? Thankfully, the CFO was aware enough to walk across the hallway and be like, dude, what's going on with this invoice? What invoice? And then it prompted that whole discussion, right? So I think it solves a big issue in that space, and that attack type especially. Yeah, and there were a couple of things you mentioned there. You mentioned ATP, so how that's part of our advanced threat protection engine. You and I actually did an episode on ATP specifically, kind of what it is, where its place in the security stack is. I'll link that episode in the show notes. And you also mentioned Emotet. You and I also did another episode that talked about Emotet and botnets in general. So if you folks are interested, I'll include both of those episodes in the show notes in case you want to check those out. But I think, Umut, the next thing I want to kind of jump into is our security awareness service stack. So for those that aren't aware, we also have a security awareness tool here at Hornetsecurity that helps train end users on not clicking that link in that email, right? And we actually have some automation and AI built into this tool as well. And I figured this would be a good case for an example too. You want to walk us through it a little bit, Umut?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, the security awareness service is used for training users on how to react and act on phishing emails. And for us, it's really funny because it's our opportunity to change sides, right? So this time around, we come from the red team and we actually generate the phishing emails. So the first part where we utilize AI is when we send these phishing emails. So we basically track how the users interact with our simulated phishing attacks. And if they report the phishing attacks to the administrative team, for example, or whether they click on links, get to the target site, enter the credentials, and so on. And based on the user performance, we actually analyze the need for the user to be trained. And according to that, the user gets e-learning trainings assigned and also receives more simulated attacks to check how the user is going to behave when the new emails are coming in. And we also do the opposite. So some companies have users that are really good at detecting simulated phishing attacks. They always report these simulated phishing attacks. And we don't want to disturb their productivity within the team, within the company, and so on. And if we detect that, the AI solution is actually capable of scheduling less simulated phishing attacks for these users because it more or less already assigns them a higher level of security. So in this case, the users are not required to undergo lots of e-learning trainings, and they don't need to receive simulated attacks because every time they receive one, they report it basically.
Right. And I think that's the key part there, because a lot of organizations, they start looking at security awareness training solution, and the big thing that I've heard complaints of in the industry is like, it takes too much time, or for the administrator, right, for the IT pro to sit down, install it, manage it, takes a lot of time. That's what I love about our solution. So I can put my system admin hat back on and I can look at our solution and like, okay, I switch this thing on. I enable the automation, the AI features. My end users start getting, an ESI score, an employee security index. Again, that's kind of that score you mentioned where, I always use Bob in accounting as my example, right? So if Bob is clicking a lot of stuff he shouldn't be clicking in these simulations, Bob's score is going to be really low. But like you mentioned towards the end of your section there, you said, if they're doing really well, their score is going to be very high, and they're not going to get as many, but the ones they get are going to be a little trickier, right? And so it's funny, a couple months ago, I got one in my inbox that was simulating a compromised internal user account. So it was from a legit Hornetsecurity.com email address, but this was from somebody in the organization I had never interacted with before. I had to be like, who is this person? Like, okay, so Hornetsecurity.com email address. And what tipped me off almost instantly was because they said, Andy, there's something really strange in the second page of this Excel document. Can you take a look at it? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, there's no way I'm touching this thing. And the other one I got, and I have to believe this is part of the AI generated phishing simulations. Is and for a second I got really excited because I saw this and they're like, oh, hey, we've got this new exercise initiative for employees, and it was from our HR person, or at least it appeared to be. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Yeah, I should check this out. And I'm like, wait a second. So I look at the email, the sender address, right? And it's like hornetsecurity.com no, it's hornetsecurity login.com or something like that. And I'm like, okay. All right. Well, this is a phishing attempt. But anyway. So yeah, I really like how we're using AI inside of our security awareness service stack as well too. So again, just some concrete examples of how some security vendors, us in this case, are utilizing AI in our stacks. And I think it's important to highlight that. And again, just kind of let the community know that it's not all doom and gloom for AI and cybersecurity, right? So, and I guess to wrap up this episode, I just kind of want to finish off with some, I don't know, maybe some predictions. I know we do predictions a lot in some of our content, but what advancements do you see happening in the defensive security space as a result of continued AI integration? What do you think we're going to see in the next 6, 12, 24 months, Umut?
Yeah, you mentioned predictions already. So predictions is a very good key point to talk about.
Right.
We already see the first models that are quite good at doing forecasts, and they're also quite good at detecting threats before they occur, depending on anomalies in logs. You mentioned log analysis already, right?
Right.
So for network endpoint systems and their logs and so on, this will be quite huge. I believe that going forward, we will see huge advancements in that direction, that we will be more capable of detecting anomalies, that many companies will jump on the train also, and that we will also get to see first bigger open source projects in that direction to help with anomaly detection. You also have a sysadmin background, right? I think the biggest stack to detect system metrics right now is Prometheus and Telegraph and so on. And probably the company behind that will also jump into that trend and implement AI to help with anomaly detection.
Right.
Besides that, coming from the threat actors, we will see more threats, more advanced threat especially, because people get used to this. This whole ChatGPT stuff is quite new, right? So it started, I believe, in December last year. And within 7 months, a lot of new products came up to the market.
Yeah.
And we saw a lot of new advancements. Every month, new models come up that are better than the previous models and so on.
It's crazy how fast it's moving.
We saw models that have been trained exclusively on darknet content. So this is also quite exciting coming from someone like me, who's trying to understand that. But the possibility that we can do this can be quite frightening, but it also comes with potential in other environments, right? We talked about how it can also help blue teaming. Something that I find quite exciting, there's a recent news about the AI actually that can detect passwords and everything that you enter at your notebook, depending on the sound of the keystrokes. So we already came at this level, and this already hit the mainstream media. So I think behind closed doors, many things are going on right now. So in general, I believe that going forward, there will be heavy focus on AI integration into product stacks all across the industry, not only in the security industry, but something that will also be in the focus is how to poison AIs so that the response of AIs can be used for malicious purposes, right?
That is going to be really interesting to watch. Now you bring that up. I was reading an article about that a couple weeks back, and it's like the implications of that are a little bit scary because, I mean, misinformation has been a big issue in our world the last 10 years now. That's just going to make it worse, right? So that's going to be interesting to watch. I think the one other area, and maybe this is more of a wish list item than a prediction, but when I think about AI-enabled attacks, I always think about deepfakes, right? Audio and video deepfakes. I would love to see a blue team tool that can somehow detect, like, oh, hey, this is an AI-generated deepfake, right? I mean, that would be, like I said, maybe that's a wish list item, but I mean, when I think about, again, speaking of misinformation or just malicious attacks, I would love to be able to address deepfakes somehow. And I think AI is the answer. We just got to get there, right?
Absolutely.
So, well, Umut, I think we're about out of time for our discussion today. Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up, and we'll have you back on for another episode at some point here. I'm sure this is not going to be the last time we're talking about AI. So always good to have you, my friend. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, definitely. And all you watching, if you found value in today's episode, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We're available out on YouTube or on all the major podcasting platforms. So feel free to choose the platform of your choice. We're also available out on the socials. So we'll include a link to that in the show notes as well. With that, hope you have a great day. We'll let you go. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching.